If it's Thursday, a shakeup at the White House as President Trump confirms his national security advisor, Michael Waltz, is leaving his post in the wake of that signal chat controversy, but says he will stay in the administration. Plus, after months of conflict, the U.S. and Ukraine reach a deal to tighten diplomatic and economic ties, marking a major step for the Trump administration towards peace talks and away from Russia. And a federal judge blocks the Trump administration from deporting migrants without due process, rejecting its argument for invoking wartime powers during peacetime and a potentially major setback for the White House's sweeping immigration crackdown. Hi there and welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Ryan Nobles in Washington, and we begin with the first major shakeup of the second Trump administration. This afternoon, President Trump confirming reports that his national security advisor, Mike Waltz, would be leaving his post, announcing on Truth Social that he will nominate Waltz to be his ambassador to the United Nations, and that the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, will add the job of national security advisor to his portfolio in the interim. Michael Waltz was with the president as recently as yesterday during a cabinet meeting in which he effusively praised his boss in front of the cameras. The shakeup comes as Waltz faced questions from some Trump allies about whether he was ever the right fit for the top national security post. Waltz, of course, faced withering criticism from national security experts for organizing that ill-fated signal chat about U.S. military strikes in Yemen and for accidentally including a journalist in the unsecured chat. Now, Waltz took responsibility for the incident, and in the aftermath of the security lapse, the president suggested that his job was safe.
The public understands that he's a very good man. That man is a very good man right there that you criticize so strongly. He's a very good man, and he will continue to do a good job.
Waltz is now going to have to answer questions about that incident when he goes through the Senate confirmation process to be UN ambassador. The shakeup also comes as right-wing allies of the president, like Laura Loomer, were aggressively lobbying Trump to oust Waltz, arguing he wasn't MAGA enough and represented an establishment foreign policy at odds with the president's agenda. Not surprisingly, Democrats today largely welcomed the news that Waltz was leaving his post, but did express concerns about who would take his place, while also saying that Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth should be the next to lose his job.
It's long overdue. I mean, he's the guy who started the unclassified text chain when there were classified channels available. It's his responsibility, but I also think Pete Hegseth needs to be fired as well.
Mr. Waltz is only the first, and maybe not even the worst, who should go. The Secretary of Defense ought to be fired today.
I'm not surprised that there is turmoil after the Signalgate fiasco, but I think there's a lot more. In the words of the late and great John McCain, there's more shoes to drop off this centipede.
And joining me now are NBC News White House correspondent Yamiche Alcindor, Andrea Mitchell, our chief Washington correspondent and chief foreign affairs correspondent for NBC News, and NBC News national security reporter Gordon Lubold. So, Yamiche, let's start with you. Why this shakeup now, and what are we hearing from Waltz?
Well, this is all, of course, just still developing. But what I can tell you is that a number of sources are now telling NBC News that this ousting of Mike Waltz from national security advisor to now being nominated to be the UN ambassador comes because he was facing a lot of scrutiny because of that signal chat where the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic was added to that group. So the president hasn't said definitively that that's what's going on, but our sources tell us that's essentially what went into this decision. The other thing to note here is that, of course, is Marco Rubio is stepping in as interim national security advisor. A source just told Kristen Welker, of course, moderator of Meet the Press, that this person is saying now that Marco Rubio might be in both of these roles indefinitely, which is really, I think, something. The official who told Kristen this is saying that Henry Kissinger might be a sort of precedent for this happening. Marco Rubio is also the acting head of USAID, so he has a lot of roles to fill. But the president essentially feeling good about the fact that he could do all of these things. Ryan.
And then there's the Laura Loomer of all of this, Yamiche. She, of course, a right-wing gadfly, a conspiracy theorist. Some would argue a very extreme character on the internet. And she is the one taking credit for Waltz's ouster. Is there any sense that she actually played a role in all of this?
I am not sure if she played a role in whether or not Mike Waltz and his deputy, at some point we're expecting the deputy Alex Waltz to also be leaving his post. It's just not clear. We know that she played a role in past firings to the NSA and past people losing their jobs or being moved around in the administration, but it's just not clear whether or not Laura Loomer actually was the reason why Michael Waltz is losing his job. We know that the president has been steadfast in saying that he believed and that he was confident in Mike Waltz, that he didn't want him to leave the administration. So now he's moving him to the UN ambassador role, at least nominating him for that role, which is going to be Senate confirmed if of course, he can get through Senate confirmation. But it's just not clear what exact role she may have played in this.
Okay, Yamiche, thank you for that reporting. Let's turn now to Andrea and Gordon here in studio. And Andrea, you, of course, were at the State Department briefing today. This news was kind of unfolding. We didn't really know which direction it was going in. You were actually asking the spokesperson, Tammy Bruce, about all of this while the news broke. I want to show our viewers exactly how that played out.
Would the secretary consider a request from the president to replace Mike Waltz temporarily or in another fashion, if that is something that the president thinks would be good for the country? Is that something that the secretary would consider?
I'm not going to jump ahead of thinking what the secretary might say or do in any context.
The president has just written on Truth Social that Mike Waltz is going to become the new U.S. ambassador to the United Nations.
Well, there you
no
go. Fabulous.
And in addition to that, he says that in the interim, Secretary of State Marco Rubio will serve as national security advisor while continuing his strong leadership at the State Department. Do you know how long he's going to be serving in both roles?
It is clear that I just heard this from you. This is the magic.
No heads up that this was coming.
I have some insights as to the potential of certain things that might happen.
Andrea, I don't know if anything signifies how chaotic and unpredictable this day was, that even the spokesperson of the State Department seemed to be caught off guard by all of this.
Caught off guard perhaps by the timing of the announcement of the decision. And that sort of tells you the whole story. The president posted it on Truth Social. I had heard about it. That's why I asked the question. It was the lead off at the briefing. And the fact is that Marco Rubio has been spending a lot of time at the White House. We've been reporting on this. And he's been spending time at the White House because he and others realize that it's very difficult to be Secretary of State when all the decisions are being made in the Oval Office. And, you know, he has other reasons, you know, swearing-ins of ambassadors and all. But it's so, symptomatic of this presidency that it's Donald Trump who makes all the decisions. There isn't a process necessarily where they have deputies meetings and it moves up, you know, the chain of command. You saw that from the Signal meeting, which didn't, by the way, include any military. Now, arguably, Pete Hegseth was more at fault for the Signal meeting, even though Mike Waltz convened it. The secret information, the sensitive information, was all disclosed by Pete Hegseth, and on a second signal to family members. So the fact that he is so far surviving is remarkable. I think Laura Loomer may have a lot to do with this because a lot of people, you know, experienced in Washington think that Mike Waltz should have retired when the conspiracy, or resigned rather, when this conspiracy theorist, 9/11 denier, walked into the Oval Office with a list of his aides and had them fired a couple of weeks ago. And that was remarkable, undercutting him. So he's been on thin ice, and not just because of the Signal thing. And now he has to go through a confirmation, which is not required of the National Security Advisor.
And Democrats are eager to ask about that. But let me get
Rubio was really trying to prove his bona fides because he came in with people saying, well, he's an outsider. He ran against Donald Trump. He was little Mario in the 2016 campaign, little Marco rather, in the 2016 campaign. And I think what he has proved by certainly evolving, shall we say, on a number of the issues that he held so dearly as a senator, on Ukraine, on foreign aid, on immigration, which he had once co-sponsored in a bipartisan way in the Senate, that he has proved himself to be a MAGA loyalist. And just look at his cabinet statement yesterday sitting next to the president, which was really...
Well, I mean, I wonder, though, having both of these responsibilities, two enormous responsibilities, being in charge of the National Security Council, also being in charge of the Department of State. What's the vibe at Foggy Bottom? Are people nervous that he's going to have so much responsibility now?
I think some of them may feel more empowered because he's closer to the seat of power.
Right.
And he's been spending so much time at the White House anyway. But I do think that just in terms of travel and communications and the portfolio, already he was, somewhat being overshadowed by Steve Witkoff, who has the Russia portfolio, 4 meetings with Vladimir Putin, not by the Secretary of State, the Iran negotiations, as well as Gaza. The Secretary of State has not spent much time at all on that Middle East. He has spent time in the Gulf, but not so much in the Middle East, and in the Gulf, in Riyadh, in connection more with the Russian talks in Ukraine. So it may be more difficult than it was for Henry Kissinger, but Henry Kissinger did it uniquely because he did, the overture to China. He did so much, and it was, of course, Vietnam.
Yeah. So, Gordon, let's take a look at this from your perspective as someone who covers national security. I mean, how is the national security world reacting to all this turmoil right now?
First, definitely a surprise. And I talked to some people, and including allies today, who were taken aback by it. And I think we all kind of recognize that there was a surprise there. I think it'll be interesting to see how the president's national security and foreign policy potentially changes. Waltz was kind of seen as maybe not MAGA enough, maybe a little bit too much of a war hawk. And yet, and so we have this fight in the Red Sea against the Houthis. It was Secretary Hegseth, I might point out, that last night tweeted a pretty aggressive tweet against Iran, and we're going to come get you, that sort of thing. So we'll see if some of that policy maybe begins to shift potentially under Rubio.
Does it create a new level of focus on Secretary Hegseth, though? I mean, every Democrat I talked to today on Capitol Hill, as you said, automatically turned the conversation in his direction. And once Mike Waltz goes through this confirmation process, I have to imagine Hegseth's name is going to come up over and over again.
I don't think the Hegseth story is over. I think there's more to come, probably. We obviously saw that, reporting suggests that the president didn't want to lose a cabinet member in the first 100 days. So we're now in, Waltz is not a cabinet member per se, but we're just past that. I think maybe we're getting to the point where he would feel more comfortable removing Hegseth in the coming weeks, not because of Signalgate per se, but for just the other reasons and the turmoil and the chaos.
Gordon smartly just mentioned his tweet last night, Hegseth's about Iran. I would watch Iran closely and the Houthis because they are not holding the talks that we had expected this Saturday. For logistical, quote, reasons, they have been postponed. And that was supposed to be the next round, the third round of negotiations. And coming with that very aggressive post from Hegseth, they've got good reason to go after the Houthis. And you know that the president is really concerned about doing something to control the Houthis, punish Iran, and stop them from...
But could that extend to an actual outright conflict with Iran? Are we anywhere near that?
No, I don't think so. I think that, if anything, that would come if these negotiations fall apart. Then Netanyahu would move in very quickly because he is very much concerned about these negotiations.
Gordon, did you want to add a point on that?
Our sense is that Hegseth's tweet was not necessarily coordinated, and the language and the kind of tone and tenor of it was maybe a little bit beyond where the administration is right now. We're not getting ready for a big fight over the weekend or some kind of major attack. I mean, who knows? But I just think there's more to come on Pete Hegseth.
Okay, there's so much to talk about today. I'm so lucky to have both of you here.
Thank you.
Andrew, Gordon, thank you for being here. Appreciate it. And joining me now is John Bolton, who served as National Security Advisor during the first Trump administration and UN Ambassador during George W. Bush's presidency, so someone who knows a lot about both of these jobs. He also just wrote a Wall Street Journal op-ed that just published. Chaos is embedded in Trump's DNA. Mr. Bolton, tell me first, what surprised you more, that Waltz was departing as National Security Advisor or that he was being nominated to be the UN Ambassador?
Well, I think the latter was more surprising. I think most people in Washington believed that it was only a matter of time before Mike Waltz moved on, probably outside the administration. I'm surprised that they've nominated him for a job that would require Senate confirmation, because you can guarantee that the confirmation hearing will be dominated by the Signal chat group issue. It's a great job. I think at the UN, I think he could do a fine job up there. I wish him well, but it's not going to be fun going through confirmation.
So should we perceive this as a promotion? Was he fired? Is it something in between? You know both of these jobs. Which one is more important?
Well, you know, I don't know. It wasn't my career path, but everybody does it a different way. I think in a way it was designed to be a face-saving exit for Mike Waltz, and unexpected. Perhaps it was just decided today. There were certainly no rumors of this before. But I do think that the administration was caught unawares. I think that's the only explanation for why Secretary of State Marco Rubio is now also presumably temporarily assuming the job of National Security Advisor. So it does show that this was not the plan. Let's put it that way.
And how difficult will that be to have the responsibility of being Secretary of the State and being the National Security Advisor?
Well, since the creation of the National Security Council, and by statute Congress passed in 1947, it's only happened once, where Henry Kissinger kept his job as a National Security Advisor and became Secretary of State in the Nixon administration in late 73, at the heart of the Watergate crisis. And it was a unique time in American history, a real constitutional crisis unfolding, and a time of enormous danger and uncertainty in international affairs. And you had the totally unique personality of Henry Kissinger, able to do both jobs through Nixon's resignation in August of '74, and then obviously into the early months of Gerald Ford's presidency, when Kissinger gave up the National Security Advisor job to Brent Scowcroft. So that one time before is not a good augury for the Trump administration, let's put it that way. Yeah. And the system doesn't work when Secretary of State, or it could be the Secretary of Defense, holds the National Security Advisor job. The whole point of that position is to be the broker among the different cabinets and agencies in the national security community and helping formulate recommendations to the president. So when one person holds both, other departments and agencies feel that the scale is not tipped in their direction.
Yeah, and you write about chaos being in President Trump's DNA. Is this an example of that chaos? And do you see any signs of him trying to avoid chaos by nominating Waltz to a different administration post?
I think that's part of it. I'm not at all sure that decision may not have been reached today. To try and solve two problems. They by nominating first Elise Stefanik to the UN job and then pulling her nomination. I feel very sorry for her that had to happen. It's sort of rubbing salt in the wounds then to move Mike Waltz over to it. But I think they were trying to solve as many problems as they could. But the problem, the fundamental problem, is still the chaos in the Oval Office, not in the chair of the National Security Advisor.
Yeah, so in other words, it doesn't matter who Donald Trump has in these positions if he's still the person calling the shots. Is that what you mean?
Sure, and the president always calls the shots, but I think Mike Waltz's experience should tell anybody in the private sector or any other position outside the federal government, if you've got a secure job, think long and hard about abandoning it to go and serve in the Trump administration.
And finally, sir, obviously there's a lot of speculation that perhaps the Signal chat debacle, that scandal, factored into today's decision. If that's true, why does Pete Hegseth still have a job?
Well, that's a very good question. I don't think it's because the National Security Advisor job is not confirmable and the Defense Department Secretary job is. Because otherwise they wouldn't have put Mike Waltz up to go through confirmation to be UN ambassador. I can't tell the reason. Some people say it's the result of the intervention of this person, Laura Loomer, which would be very disturbing if it's true. I mean, the head of the MAGA movement, Donald Trump, is listening to this person who knows absolutely nothing about national security. And moving aside a serious person in the form of Mike Waltz, and opening a big gap in the decision-making mechanism that's there to serve the president. That's the purpose of it, and Trump is just making a mess of it again.
And then finally, with Waltz out of this job, are you concerned that there are far fewer guardrails in this administration?
Well, Trump doesn't have guardrails. That's the point I was trying to make in the Wall Street Journal op-ed. Those who have the responsibility to try and make intelligible decisions and then carry them out in a coherent fashion have to continue to try and do their job regardless of the chaos in the White House. Obviously, the president makes the final decision, but America is not well served if the only thing that people do is listen to what Trump says and follow blindly what his instructions are without trying to help give him information that might inform his decision, give him options he could consider. That makes the president in a position where he can do the job better. It doesn't constrain him. It enables him if he allows the process to work.
Okay, former Ambassador John Bolton, uniquely qualified to talk about the news of the day. We appreciate you being here, sir.
Thank you for having me.
And before we go, we have a major programming announcement. My friend, colleague, and anchor of this show, Kristen Welker, will have an exclusive one-on-one interview with President Trump marking his first 100 days in office. Watch it this Sunday only on Meet the Press. Still to come, though, today. Coming up, tightening ties. What's next for U.S.-Ukraine relations after reaching a landmark deal to rebuild Kyiv and repay aid? Don't go anywhere. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. After months of tense negotiations and an Oval Office blow-up, the U.S. and Ukraine signed a long-awaited minerals deal yesterday. The deal will give the U.S. access to some of the war-torn country's critical resources as a form of repayment for military aid. Remember, this was the deal that was supposed to be signed back in February, but was derailed by that extremely tense and combative Oval Office meeting between President Trump and President Zelensky. Under the agreement, the U.S. and Ukraine will create an investment fund that will receive 50% of royalties, license fees, and other similar payments from natural resource projects in Ukraine. A senior administration official notes that this agreement goes beyond just rare earth minerals, but also includes oil, gas, and natural resources. Here's more of what Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said about the agreement.
I think that this is win-win for both sides, and it's very innovative. As President Trump said in the Oval that day to Zelensky, you have no cards. Well, you know what? President Trump has now dealt him a royal flush, because now we can take these cards and go and show the Russian leadership that there is no daylight between the Ukrainian people, the American people, between our goals.
And joining me now is Bill Taylor, former U.S. ambassador to Ukraine and a distinguished fellow at the Atlantic Council. Ambassador, do you agree with the secretary here that this is a win-win deal for both the U.S. and Ukraine? And does this help get the U.S.-Ukraine relationship back on steadier footing?
Ryan, I think the answer is yes and yes. The Ukrainians seem to be happy with this agreement. They weren't happy earlier. There was the first drafts of this agreement were not good from their standpoint. They made some proposals. They made some counter offers, which apparently the Americans have agreed to. So yes, both sides now, I think, are benefiting, will benefit from this agreement. And I also think that this is an indication, among several, that the U.S.-Ukrainian relationship is back on track. I mean, the secretary said it. You have shown that iconic photo of President Trump and President Zelensky in the Vatican last Saturday over and over. That's another indication that this is working in the direction. Another indication is Senator Graham putting together this bill that will sanction President Putin if he doesn't come to the table. All to say that the U.S.-Ukrainian relationship is on better track, and I think many people, including this administration, are recognized that Putin is the problem.
Yeah, and Secretary Bessent signaled that the minerals deal will give the U.S. some kind of leverage when it comes to negotiating with Russia. I think you agree with that point, but how would you say Moscow's reacting to the deal?
Moscow must be surprised and a bit discombobulated that the Americans and the Ukrainians are now working together. And the Secretary of the Treasury says this is an indication of a long-term relationship, a long-term strategic alignment between the United States and Ukraine. And Putin thought he was on the track to get that kind of relationship. He's not there. President Putin is not there.
Well, it's interesting because the Trump administration, Secretary Rubio in particular, seems to be threatening over and over again that if Russia and Ukraine can't make some sort of progress, that the U.S. would walk away from these negotiations. Now that this mineral deal is in place, does that make it a lot harder from the U.S. to just walk away from peace talks?
I think it does. I think it does. And indeed, the administration has said, we're not talking about, days here. We're talking about several weeks to work on this. And this new relationship, the strategic relationship between Ukraine and Russia, between Ukraine and the United States and against Russia, is an important new element that will force President Putin to decide to come to the table. That's what has to happen. The Ukrainians and the Russians, as you're showing there, the Ukrainians and the Americans, as you're showing right there, have agreed on a long-term, a 30-day ceasefire, air, land, and sea. And when President Trump took that to President Putin, he said no. So you got the Americans and the Ukrainians on one side, and you got Putin resisting on the other side.
But there is one big sticking point, particularly from Ukraine's perspective, and that's the issue of Crimea. The Trump administration seems willing to hand Crimea over to Russia, is encouraging Zelensky to agree to that as part of these negotiations. What are the ramifications if the U.S. were to recognize that annexation of Crimea? What would the political cost be for Zelensky?
Well, first of all, President Trump has made it clear that he's not expecting President Zelensky to recognize Russian claim to Crimea. The American proposal of a couple of weeks ago, not officially, but it's been reported by you and others on what the elements of this proposal are. In that proposal, yes, it had the United States recognizing the legal claim of Russia toward Crimea. The Ukrainians will never recognize that. The Europeans will never recognize the Russian claim on Crimea. And since that discussion, but since that proposal of a couple of weeks ago, there have been input from Ukrainians and from Europeans to the Americans to say, reconsider that, because exactly what you say, the implications, the ramifications of blessing, of agreeing to, of acquiescing to a nation, Russia, grabbing territory from a neighbor and having it legally recognized would have ramifications way beyond even Crimea. So this is being reconsidered, I believe, within the administration.
Okay. Ambassador Bill Taylor, thank you so much. Always have such great perspective on this issue. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Ron. Good to be here.
Up next, a major legal setback in the White House's sweeping immigration agenda as a Trump-appointed judge rules the administration's deportations under the Alien Enemies Act are unlawful. Those developments are next. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. In the latest legal blow to President Trump's mass deportation agenda, a Texas judge ruled today the administration cannot use the Alien Enemies Act to deport Venezuelan migrants without due process. The Trump-appointed judge said the use of the wartime authority to remove migrants the administration alleges are members of the Tren de Aragua gang was unlawful, while rejecting the president's claims that the U.S. is facing an invasion. Joining me now is NBC News senior Homeland Security correspondent Julia Ainsley. Julia, how significant is this ruling, and what does it mean for the president's deportation plan?
It really is significant. I know we've seen a lot of rulings about El Salvador and the plan there and Albrego Garcia, but this is the first time a federal judge, and mind you, this is a Trump-appointed judge, has ever weighed in on the question of can a president invoke the Alien Enemies Act right now during peacetime and say that these people, these immigrants, specifically allegedly these gang members, are part of an invasion. And this judge is saying they're not. And so we can expect it to go to the Fifth Circuit and probably to the Supreme Court. But at least now we've kicked that off. And so for the Trump administration, which, by the way, isn't really pointing to any staggering deportation numbers yet, This was really their best tactic for shock and awe so far, and now they've had a pretty crucial wound to that soldier going
So even
forward.
though the judges made this ruling, though, can the administration still carry out these deportations as it's being adjudicated in higher courts?
No, and in fact, they already were on a hold. So just 2 weeks ago, if you can remember, there was this group of people they were trying to send out in the middle of the night, just like they would on March 15th. Our crew saw them doing a U-turn. At that point, the Supreme Court weighed in at like 1:30 in the morning, I think it was, and said, for now, we're issuing a stay, an administrative stay. You cannot remove anybody who's part of this class. So it was already on hold, but that was temporary. And honestly, the Supreme Court could have ruled any day now to overturn that. And so they could lift that stay, but this, based on the merit, still needs to make its way up. And so, yes, at this point, there is a nationwide block on Trump's use of that act.
Yeah, but the Supreme Court did rule that the administration could proceed with deportations under the Alien Enemies Act. But the key here was that they had to be given due process. So how soon could this issue be back in the Supreme Court?
So what happened is after they issued that, there was pretty much evidence that they were violating the order, that it wasn't due process. So that's why they put out this administrative stay. Now that this judge in Texas has issued this ruling, and it's nationwide, it doesn't just apply to people in the Southern District of Texas, it's going to need to come back up to the Supreme Court. I think the next step is to see what the Fifth Circuit does. That's traditionally a very conservative court. And so if they then rule in the opposite way of this judge in Texas, then it'll be up to the Supreme Court to see what they do with it and whether or not we'll really, get an answer on it by the end of the year. But for now, there's a block.
Right. And essentially the reason they're using the Alien Enemies Act is to try and get around the same due process that it would normally, the way that process would normally work, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's not that people can't be deported, but the question is, can you deport them to a country like El Salvador where they're in these prisons without any communication? And can you do it without due process? I think the question that we're not getting answered in these courts, because it's all about the use of the Alien Enemies Act, is if someone is deported under typical law, and the judge said they could today, they could go to El Salvador. That seems like that could be another lawsuit, that people who are deported should go back to their countries rather than into this prison. But right now, we're not talking about that. We're just talking about people who haven't been awarded due process at all.
And we've got you an update on the Kilmar Abrego Garcia case, especially because Donald Trump basically said this week in an interview that he could bring him back whenever he wanted. How is that going to impact the case?
Yeah, well, he did say that he could do that. And of course, we'll hear from that judge in Maryland to see if they're doing enough to facilitate it. But also overnight, DHS putting out a little bit more information to damage his character, showing a pretty egregious domestic violence report from his wife in 2020. This is coming after we already know she did file a protective order some months after that. Something she said was just basically an overreaction. She didn't need. These are some pretty scary details about what happened in this case. But what's at the heart of it is that he hasn't had due process. It hasn't been that a judge was able to look at the evidence. He was never able to defend himself and decide that that's enough to remove his legal status to stay in the United States.
Okay, Julia Ainsley, thank you.
Thanks.
After the break, it's the Trump economy, where the White House's efforts to broker dozens of trade deals stand amid new warnings that tariffs and economic uncertainty could cost small businesses big time. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. The White House is sticking with its economic agenda despite new warnings that its ongoing trade wars could be devastating for U.S. companies and consumers. After touring a steel plant in South Carolina this afternoon, Vice President J.D. Vance lashed out at critics and defended the president's tariff moves. Take a listen.
I'm sure you've heard some criticism of the president's trade policies from people who ought to know better. Because if you listen to the American media, or you listen to a lot of politicians in our own country, they seem desperate to forget the very lessons that made Donald J. Trump the 45th and 47th president of the United States of America.
This morning, Kevin Hassett, the director of the National Economic Council, told CNBC the White House has 20 hard offers on the table with trading partners. But this comes as GM warns that tariffs could cause a $4 to $5 billion hit to the bottom line. New data shows that U.S. manufacturing activity shrunk last month, and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce sent this warning to the White House, requesting that the administration take immediate actions to save America's small businesses and stave off a recession. As a reminder, a majority of Americans disapprove of President Trump's handling of inflation and trade. That, according to a recent NBC News Stay Tuned poll. Joining me now to talk more about this is NBC News senior White House correspondent Gabe Gutierrez. He is in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, where the president is set to deliver remarks at the University of Alabama's commencement tonight. So, Gabe, it is full steam ahead from the White House on tariffs. What are we hearing from them today?
Yeah, certainly full steam ahead, Ryan. But as you said, the White House is saying that they have 20 hard offers. What's notable, they have no deals struck just yet. Earlier this week, we heard from the Commerce Secretary who said that there was one deal in principle, but it was pending approval by that country's parliament. Didn't say what country it was. Separately, we've heard from White House officials that a deal with India may be close, that other deals with Asian countries may be close, but we're not quite there yet. What the White House has spent today talking about is they're trying to highlight investments in the U.S. already and trying to tamp down those fears of a plummeting economy. They're also touting that Mercedes-Benz has announced a new vehicle will be made here at its plant here in Tuscaloosa. And certainly that's something we expect to hear more about from the president as he comes here to the University of Alabama later today, as you mentioned, delivering those commencement address remarks, Ryan.
And Gabe, we saw the New York Post, which is a favorite of this White House, skewer Trump's remarks yesterday, saying that Americans are going to have to buy fewer toys. Skimp on the Barbie is the headline. What's the White House saying?
Well, that is in true New York Post fashion. A brutal headline right there. Look, again, the White House trying to change the subject here and trying to explain away what the president meant. Stephen Miller, the deputy chief of staff, briefed reporters earlier today. Here was how he tried to interpret the president's remarks. Listen.
He was making the point that I think almost every American consumer agrees with. If they had a choice between and I'm a parent of young children, you had a choice between a doll from China that might have, say, lead paint in it, that is not as well constructed as a doll made in America that has a higher environmental and regulatory standard and that is made to a higher degree of quality. And those two products are both on Amazon, that yes, you probably would be willing to pay more for a better made American product.
And so certainly the president yesterday, a bit of a mistake on his part, by his critics say, in that he was referring to, he was acknowledging essentially that children will be asked to sacrifice this holiday season. Again, the White House not really acknowledging that today, trying to change the subject and essentially reiterating that they believe that this short-term pain will be worth it for long-term gain, Ryan.
And also the same White House that is touting the fact that they're trying to deregulate and get rid of a lot of this oversight for some of these things that Stephen Miller was bragging about. Gabe, in Alabama, thank you so much for joining me. We appreciate it. Joining me now on set is Naveen Nayak. He's the president of the Center for American Progress Action Fund, and Sarah Chamberlain, president and CEO of the Republican Main Street Partnership. So, Sarah, we're going to talk about the economy in a second, but we have to start with the news of the day, which is, of course, Mike Waltz getting moved from NSA to UN ambassador. The signal leak, this controversy, that was weeks ago. Why do you think this is happening now?
So first of all, Mike is a good friend of Republican Main Street Partnership. He was a member when he was in Congress. He's a great man. I think that they were waiting to try to find a soft landing for him. The U.S. UN ambassador came up. They pushed him over to a soft landing. It's a great job for him. He'll do a good job there.
What do you think it means, though, about the trajectory of the administration right now, particularly in the national security space?
I think he's making, obviously, the president's making some changes there. He continues to make some changes. I don't know how many jobs Secretary Rubio can do. I think this is now his fourth. But he will figure out who should come in and replace Mike Waltz.
And the first Trump administration, you remember, Naveen, sure. It would seem like every day someone was getting fired via tweet. And obviously we haven't seen that level of chaos and turmoil, but this is reminiscent of that. Could this be the start of a trend?
I think it's actually kind of embarrassing, to your point. If this is because of Signalgate, you had 2 weeks. You could have planned out who was going to be the new national security advisor. Having the secretary or the press secretary of the Secretary of State find out from the press that her boss is actually going to play this role, absolute incompetence. This is our national security. This is one of the most important roles in the White House, protecting our national security. and they're fumbling this. It is sort of an indication, actually, that even though operationally things may seem a little bit better, they're obviously not the same kind of chaos and more loyalists, they're still deeply incompetent. And it's like people's lives are at risk, right? The single gate was not just a Washington controversy. Soldiers' lives were put at risk because of that. And so I think it is a real problem for them.
All right, let's now turn to the economy. And we were just talking with Gabe about these comments that President Trump said about children having to deal with less dolls around the Christmas season. Naveen, Donald Trump told us and promised that prices were going to be lower on day one. He said nothing about having to do with less around the holiday season. Is this a gift for Democrats? How did Democrats take advantage of this?
Yeah, I mean, listen, this is an absolute con. There's no other way to say it. Donald Trump talked about tariffs. Never once did he say it would be painful. He promised it was going to be prosperity. This was going to be make America great again. And, you know, he's been saying for weeks now, there might be some short-term pain. He's shown a lot of callousness. You know, kids don't, you know, you'll make do with two. His Secretary of Commerce saying it's okay if you miss a Social Security check. I do think that it's really revealing how much he actually doesn't care about the American people in doing this, and how, you know, this is, I don't know that there's an example of this in our history of a self-inflicted act tanking an economy. Maybe Liz Truss shortly when she was, you know, the premier in Britain, you know, her actions really sent the reserve there tanking. But this was all driven by Donald Trump's chaotic policies. And the American people are the ones suffering.
Yeah, Sarah, he did promise a lot of this, right? He said he was going to institute tariffs. He said he was going to go after what he thought were unfair trade practices. But should he have been a little bit more clear about how it would be difficult in the early going?
He could have been, but he wasn't, and now we're living with that. But I'm telling you, in 60 days, I'd love to come back here and sit again, because I think we're going to have a lot of the deals done, and we're going to be moving the country forward. And the American people voted for him overwhelmingly. He got the majority of the vote. They knew tariffs were coming. Okay. So we're really not that concerned about it at Main Street. 60 days, we'll have this discussion again.
All right. Well, we're going to bring you back for that for sure. But, Sarah, I do want to play for you a little bit of what President Trump said last night. He had a phone town hall last night with another network. Listen to how he responded to a question.
What's the biggest mistake you think you've made in the first 100 days?
I'll tell you, that's the toughest question I can have, because I don't really believe I've made
You
mistakes.
made any mistakes.
We're in a transition period. We're in a transition period.
I think Lee is reassured.
I think you're going to see tremendous economic victories over the next period of a year.
So I don't know if we've ever seen Donald Trump admit a mistake.
Right. Are we surprised he said that?
Right.
No.
But is that what people want to hear right now as they're dealing with kind of the fallout now from these economic decisions?
He never admitted he made a mistake the first time he was president. They elected him again. I think they're kind of used to this, so they don't expect him to admit anything that's not perfect.
I think the risk is for the rest of the Republican Party. Right? Donald Trump's not going to be on the ballot again, and he's kind of showing this sort of callousness. It's a real betrayal of the middle class. And I think for him, it's who cares. I mean, the American people are telling him in poll after poll after poll, they're really unhappy. You have consumer sentiment. They're really unhappy with the one thing they really trusted Donald Trump on. If there's one thing in the first term, his numbers were always really positive. It was on the economy. And he is in Joe Biden territory here in the 30s in some of these surveys on his approval, and he's tone deaf about it, right? That not to admit any mistakes, to talk about kids having to make sacrifice. I think for the rest of the Republican Party, there's a real price to pay to just pretend like, you know, we don't really care about the American people. What's more important is Donald Trump to us.
But what's going for us as the Democrats are even lower in the popular votes.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
well,
they're
not in the
popular
generic ballot.
enough.
Not in the generic ballot.
They're not popular.
It's changing very fast. The generic ballot for...
Our members are not seeing that in the districts. The Democrats are still very unpopular.
Okay, well, Sarah, to that point, though, Republicans have a big challenge in front of them over the next few weeks in getting this reconciliation package over the finish line. How are they going to get these extension of these big tax cuts, the big cuts that they're looking for, and do it without hurting Medicaid recipients across the country? Can it be done?
It is going to be a balancing act, but they're confident they can get it done. They're hoping to find a lot of waste and fraud in Medicare and Medicaid where they're really going to pull it out from there. We'll see.
$800 billion worth?
It's a lot. I mean, I fully admit it's a lot, but they're hoping to get there. And next week's going to be a key week.
But to Sarah's point, will Democrats be able to message on this effectively and get on the same page?
This is a gift if you're the Democrats. Americans have a lot of affordability problems, housing, groceries. Are Republicans doing anything to address any of those? No. They're actually giving a tax cut to the wealthy, disproportionately benefits the wealthy. They're talking about lowering the corporate tax rate right now, and they might take away your health care, the basic needs that American people have. I think it's just going to show the cruelty and the chaos of the Republican brand, and that is probably what the Democrats need to get their footing.
So the game plan on Capitol Hill, Sarah, they want to get this done by July 4th. That's around July 1st. You say 60 days, you're going to come back.
Right.
We're going to have a review of this. It'll be
here
at the same time as the reconciliation bill gets done, and we'll try it and see where things stand. All right. I appreciate you guys both for being here. Thank you so much. Thanks so much. Still to come, the consequences on Capitol Hill and beyond as the Trump administration pulls federal funding for biomedical research. That story is next. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. The Trump administration has dedicated much of its first several months to cutting government staff and slashing funding. That includes at the National Institutes of Health, the government's primary agency responsible for public health and biomedical research. NBC's Capitol Hill correspondent Julie Circuit spoke to senators from both parties and the mom of a cancer survivor about the impacts the funding cuts could have on Americans.
I sit before you not only as a mother, but as a witness to what federally supported research can make possible and what it would mean to lose it.
Emily Stenson's 5-year-old daughter, Charlie, was only 3 when she was diagnosed with cancer.
There's not an aspect of our life that cancer hasn't touched.
As the Trump administration aims to slash research funding at the National Institutes of Health, Emily traveled across the country to call on the Republican-controlled Senate to save the program that she says saved her daughter.
Without the NIH, who would you have turned to? Nobody. How much did they help you and Charlie? They gave us a future together.
The National Institutes of Health supports clinical trials for childhood cancers like Charlie's, stage 4 germ cell cancer.
The trials provided us with the drugs that were needed to save her life. Another trial provided us with an option to preserve her fertility if she wants to be a mom when she grows up.
Charlie loves to dance, sing, and spend time with her 2 siblings. With us, she was understandably shy.
Do you want to say anything? You don't have to. That's okay.
But thanks to Senator Patty Murray, was occupied with coloring books. The Department of Government Efficiency has already slashed billions in NIH research grants and fired hundreds of scientists.
We need a surgical approach, not a sledgehammer.
Now the White House is eyeing a 40% cut to the NIH budget in the next fiscal year, according to a leaked draft obtained by NBC News.
These actions put our leadership in biomedical innovation at real risk and must be reversed.
Senator Susan Collins, the Republican chair of the committee that controls the federal budget, opposes the cuts.
What power do you have as a United States Senator, as a Republican, the party that's in charge, to actually do something and push back on something like this?
We have a great deal of ability to push back. My approach is to make the case to the administration. I also believe that we need to have public hearings so that the people we represent understand what the consequences are.
77% of Americans are opposed to reducing federal funding for medical research, according to a new poll.
Thank you for being here, Charlie, and bringing your mom. And congratulations.
Emily is Senator Patty Murray's constituent.
Do you think the administration really understands what these cuts are impacting?
I think they sit in an office someplace and have no idea that there's Charlies and Emilys out there that are counting on them.
The NIH is the largest funder of biomedical research in the world.
If the NIH stopped funding clinical trials, like hospitals like Seattle Children's would not be able to exist. And the clinical trials that save kids' lives every day wouldn't exist either.
Thankfully, Charlie is now cancer-free. But that's not the reality for thousands of American children.
I'm hoping to put a face to childhood cancer. We're real people, they're constituents, and we rely on research. And we cannot have them cutting things that are saving our kids' lives.
And Ryan, Emily and thousands of American parents whose children have cancer might find out soon enough whether these cuts to the National Institutes of Health might become permanent. And that is because we are soon going to see the exact budget proposals for the next fiscal year, according to 3 sources who say those plans can come as soon as tomorrow. Ryan?
Julie Sirkin, thank you so much for that report. I'll be back tomorrow with more Meet the Press Now, but don't forget, as we mentioned, our own Kristen Welker will have an exclusive interview with President Trump this Sunday on Meet the Press. Do not miss it. Kristen preparing for that interview as we speak. It should make a lot of news, so don't miss it on Sunday on Meet the Press. We'll have plenty of news tomorrow as well, but the news will continue right here on NBC News Now. My good friend Hallie Jackson is up next. Thanks so much for watching.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.